De'Aaron Fox from the Sacramento Kings is the dream trade target, but if the Pelicans can't get a deal done like that, should they just keep Brandon Ingram? It's Trade Target Thursday here on Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. Here with you on this Thursday, it's Trade Target Thursday, and we are going to look at the Sacramento Kings because I think this represents a really interesting scenario for the Pelicans and maybe informs them on what they should do or do not do based on the Brandon Ingram trade target. So we're going to break this all down in today's episode. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. Tell a friend about the show and become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to Locked On Pelicans. So let's jump into this one. This was inspired by our Locked On Kings host, Matt George, because I went on the Locked On Kings podcast on Monday to discuss what a Brandon Ingram trade between the Sacramento Kings and the New Orleans Pelicans would look like. And I said, let's get this done real quick. Let's get this deal done so fast. Brandon Ingram, a pick or two for De'Aaron Fox. Let's call it a day. Let's all go home. Short podcast. Everyone leaves satisfied here. Because Brandon Ingram fills a real need for that Kings team. They need another kind of secondary, tertiary creator. Brandon Ingram can fill that. They need some more length on the wing that's a scorer that they don't quite have anymore as Harrison Barnes is kind of taking steps back. Brandon Ingram really fits a lot of that. And when you factor in that he tries defensively, that seems to make a lot of sense for the Sacramento Kings. And the Pelicans, you need a better lead guard. And it's, there's few better, I think, than De'Aaron Fox. 26.6 points per game last season. Took almost 8 3-point attempts per game last season and had the best shooting season of his career, really, at 69.9%. 69. Whew. Nice. 36.9%. There we go. 37%. Let's just make the numbers easy here. 37% from three on almost 8 attempts per game. He gets to the line. He can dish the ball a little bit too. 5.6 assists. So he's not like a true point guard, but he just gives you everything you need. He also is known to light up New Orleans, and you get to avoid that happening in the future. So De'Aaron Fox is a better player than Brandon Ingram is. So you got to give up a little bit more. Brandon Ingram plus some things for De'Aaron Fox. Let's get this deal done. One of the things that also really, I think, is a reason you'd want to go after a guy like Fox is 2 years ago, not this past year, the year before, he won Clutch Player of the Year. This is a guy that gets it done in those biggest moments. You could use a closer like that on this Pelicans team. Fox fits that bill. He'd be able to set up Zion Williamson. Zion would be able to set him up. And with his kind of renewed effort on 3-point shooting, that really fits what you're looking for. But here's the problem with that, right? We all agree. We'd love De'Aaron Fox on this team. We all agree with that. He's still young as well. He's going to be 27. He won't even turn 27 before the start of the year, right? He is just kind of entering his prime. He is really good. One of the quicker guards in the league too. So you have a guy that's kind of a slasher when you need him to be as well. Love basically everything that he's going to give you. And he's not a good defender, but he tries on the defensive side of the ball. And I think that does say something. He's definitely above average defender when it comes to that, borderlining on at times like good, where he's really good at forcing steals, different things like that. Here's the problem though. In discussing this with our Locked On Kings hosts, and this is where, the Locked On Network can kind of give you things that you can't get anywhere else. They know that team better. He knows the Kings better than I know them. The national media knows about the Kings, right? Just as I know the Pelicans better than national media does, better than he does. So when we discuss this and I go, let's make this deal done quick, because not a chance. We're not trading De'Aaron Fox. From the outside looking in, it looks like maybe they need to shake their roster up, that they should trade De'Aaron Fox and kind of mix things up. They took a step back last year. They were third in the West 2 years ago, took a big step back last year, not even making the postseason, losing to the Pelicans in the play-in tournament. We've said it a lot in the Western Conference, if you are not really dramatically trying to improve, if you just kind of stay where you are regressing. So the Kings need to do something, but it doesn't sound like that something's going to involve trading De'Aaron Fox or Domantas Sabonis. And there's actually another player that they won't trade either. So he wanted to kind of start trade discussions in a package built around Harrison Barnes and Kevin Huerter. I don't think any one of us has any interest in a deal like that. Harrison Barnes at 31, averaged 12.2 points per game last season. Shoots the three ball well, 39% on 4.7 attempts, let's say, okay. Kevin Huerter, starter for them as well. In the backcourt, was a very good three-point shooter, a bit of a revelation because they got him for virtually nothing a couple of years ago. 36% on over 5 attempts per game, 10.2 points per game. But those just feel like parts. Those feel like parts. That doesn't feel like the car. That feels like parts. And I don't want to trade Brandon Ingram for parts. I said, okay, let's evolve the trade discussion a little bit more. Would you throw in a guy like Keegan Murray? This is a wing player that I think won't be as good of a scorer long-term as Brandon Ingram is, but shoots the three ball well and is a very good defender and rebounder for his position. And they said no to Keegan Murray. So if it's going to be Kevin Huerter and Harrison Barnes and picks, I don't think the Pelicans have an interest in that, and I don't either. And if you're not going to even include Keegan Murray in a deal like that, who I really like and would love on this team, not as a direct replacement for Brandon Ingram necessarily, but you could bring him off the bench, you could start him, he gives you defense, he gives you shooting. Okay, that's at least something we can maybe have a discussion about. But if that's not going to be the case, there's no deal to get done here. Would you, I think on the best case that you could maybe tempt a team like the Sacramento Kings into a trade here, it would be Brandon Ingram and Herb Jones for De'Aaron Fox. But if they're not going to trade Fox, I don't even know if that gets it done. And at that point, we love Herb so much. I don't know if maybe it's just a personal attachment to the players and things like that, which we're guilty of. But is that a deal you would do? Let me know in the comments down below on YouTube. So if that's your best case scenario, is a trade built around Harrison Barnes, Kevin Huerter, and picks, is it better just to not trade Brandon Ingram? Is that maybe the move? Let's look at that when that kind of becomes the reality for the Pelicans. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by Gametime. I want you to think of the last time you bought tickets for a sporting event, a concert, because Gametime does all of that and they just make it easy for you. I know most of us think just about going to a Pels game, a Saints game, something like that. But you know what? You can use this for concerts. You can use it for comedy shows. I actually just bought 2 concert tickets for a show over the summer by using the Gametime app. And it's a place I've never been before. It's going to be in Los Angeles, going to the Kia Forum. Guess what? I can see the view from the seats for it. So I was able to make the best purchase possible, sit where I want, get the view of the stage that I want to see as well. That's what Gametime does. They take the guesswork out of buying tickets. One of the great things too is if you're bored on the weekend, don't know what to do on a Friday or Saturday, they got last minute deals. You can save up to 60% by buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and even more. They also have the low price guarantee. Gametime's going to give you 110% of the difference, credit you 110% of the difference if you find tickets in the same section and row for less. So you can buy whenever you want and you have that peace of mind. So take the guesswork out of buying NBA Finals tickets, other tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We are here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. And tell a friend about the show. Get them clued into what's going on with this team. We're going to go deep into the draft next week, the next 2 weeks really in the lead up to the draft. I want to look at other prospects. We've looked at kind of the same handful of big men. I want to expand that because there's some other players that y'all have said you want to hear about. I want to talk about them for all of you. I want to look into some wings and alternate guys that we might not think about as well. There's a lot. This draft is getting kind of intriguing to me right around that 18th pick or so. So I think the Pelicans are in a good position to really grab an impactful player. And I want to look at those. We'll look at trading up. We'll look at trading back. I want to look at guys like Tyler Smith, Tristan Da Silva, who I think is going to be there too, Isaiah Collier out of USC. All of those guys could be available there. I do think there are options for the Pelicans, even if maybe they should go with a big man. So that's coming up next week on Locked On Pelicans. Tomorrow is going to be the ideal offseason. If I could build any offseason and how it goes, what's that look like? I'll tell you what that's going to be. That's also realistic in tomorrow's episode of Locked On Pelicans. So right now we are talking about a potential deal with the Sacramento Kings. And I just don't really see a world where one gets done. If they're not going to trade De'Aaron Fox, then I don't think it ultimately matters. Fox is a perfect fit. Same how I think Trae Young is a really good fit too. I like Fox better than Young, but I just don't think Fox is going to be available. So it made for a really interesting discussion on the Locked On Kings podcast where we kind of went into the value of Brandon Ingram and small markets and all of those things. Make that your second listen today, the Locked On Kings podcast, if you haven't, where we discuss it, because it was just fun basketball talk that was really intriguing. But they're not going to get De'Aaron Fox here in New Orleans. If they somehow pull this off, we will throw a huge celebration on Locked On Pelicans, but I don't think it's going to happen. And I'm not interested in trading Brandon Ingram for Harrison Barnes, Kevin Huerter, and a pick or two. Nothing about that has any interest for me whatsoever. It'd be Sabonis, it would be De'Aaron Fox, and that's it. That's it. You can maybe talk me into Keegan Murray and Harrison Barnes and Kevin Huerter, but that adds $8 million to the Pelicans cap. I don't know if that's the move either. You could take Huerter out of there or Barnes out of there. They make about the same amount. So it just kind of depends. But if you're not going to get Keegan Murray, we don't have anything to discuss here. These two teams talk and go, hey, we want Ingram, we want Fox. No. And then you just hang up the phone and that's the end of the trade discussion. So say they can't find a big deal. Say Trae Young doesn't get moved. It's still iffy, right? Donovan Mitchell doesn't get moved. Darius Garland doesn't get moved. There's reports now that Cleveland isn't planning on moving on from their big four. So if that's going to be the case, what do you do? Do you just trade Brandon Ingram for pieces, for parts? Like I said, I don't like that idea, and I have no interest if that were to be the case. At that point, I think you look at just keeping Brandon Ingram, and I think you look at extending him. And I don't think that's an ideal scenario because he's going to be looking for a max. It sounds like the Pelicans aren't going to pay the max for him, maybe on more of a team-friendly deal. I don't know what that would be. Is that $2 million per year less than the max? Is it just we're not going to give you the max, but we'll give you $1 million less than that, which is essentially that same contract? What does that look like? Or does Brandon Ingram maybe take a shorter deal to at least extend his contract a little bit and allow the Pelicans to try and move on from him at a later date and time? I think that could be the option too. But I would definitely get to a point where if deals aren't looking good to me, no Trae Young, no Donovan Mitchell, Darius Garland, Jarrett Allen, right? No De'Aaron Fox, just no big name player that I think is a difference maker like that. I'm not trading Brandon Ingram for parts. And Will Guillory of The Athletic wrote an article kind of talking about this, right? Are you just shuffling deck chairs on the Titanic if you trade Ingram for a guy like Trae Young or DeJounte Murray? You kind of are in a sense, right? You still have then a hole in another position. I don't think it's exactly that because you could then elevate Trey Murphy to that wing spot that Brandon Ingram occupies if you trade Ingram for a guard. So since you have that kind of replacement waiting in the wings that we're all very high on, I don't think it's really just shuffling things because it allows other moves subsequently to be made, whether that's into the starting lineup or what have you. And while it wouldn't address the center position, you can still draft a guy. More on that in tomorrow's show. So at a certain point, if those aren't available, I just keep Brandon Ingram. I'm very iffy on the fit between him and Zion right now. But if we want to kind of be positive about it, look at it from an optimistic viewpoint, I think Ingram knows he's got to change the way he plays, his shot profile, and go back to shooting more threes, work on getting downhill more, and not just be so reliant on that mid-range jumper of his. And that mid-range jumper is good, but that just doesn't work with what you're trying to do here. So you can, I think at that point, just retain Brandon Ingram. You can't, and if you're going to do that, you have to give him an extension. And that's where things become really tricky, because if they're not, you might need to give him a max. And I don't particularly want to do that. Committing $208 million to Brandon Ingram, over a 4-year period is something that worries me a little bit about how that contract's going to age if he doesn't change his game. But at the end of season media availability, he knew he did not play well in the playoffs at all. Maybe he's still dealing with the injury, who knows? But he hurt himself in that, and I think he knows. And I think this season showed the fit was very clunky with both of them and the way that Brandon Ingram played. And I'd be willing to bet he's going to do the introspection and improve upon that. I don't think we're going to see the same Brandon Ingram next year, whether he's here in New Orleans or elsewhere. And I think that's a good thing. And that kind of self-reflection, right? That, self-awareness about all that, I think is good in a player, and I think speaks highly of him as a person. So I think you can go into next season with him on some sort of extension and not feel horrible about it, and not be oh, they haven't changed much. That just means they can use a lot of these resources to dramatically upgrade the center position. Maybe go get the kind of guards you need that could be available in free agency, like a guy, like Tyus Jones, perhaps. So there's ways that you can go into next season and still feel okay. But when I look at kind of managing assets, and I know, when I talk about that, it's not fun, right? It's not sexy. It's not exciting. We're kind of looking at it, viewing it from a value perspective, looking at it as an Excel spreadsheet and kind of reducing players to numbers and all of that. But that stuff matters, particularly to a small market team as well, like the New Orleans Pelicans, and they do need to manage their assets as well as possible. So trading Brandon Ingram for parts isn't that. That means maybe keeping him and trying to resuscitate his value a little bit, even if the fit's not the best, and then you make bigger changes elsewhere. And I think that's maybe an option that would go. Unless, tell me what you think. I'm curious. Will you trade Brandon Ingram for a package that doesn't involve De'Aaron Fox, Domantas Sabonis, or Keegan Murray? Would you do it for Harrison Barnes and Kevin Huerter and something else? Davion Mitchell, let's say, could get thrown in there too, right? Whatever from the Kings at that point. It doesn't really matter. I wouldn't do that. Nothing about that makes me really excited or, makes me think that it's going to be a dramatic change on this Pelicans roster, and I'd rather keep Brandon Ingram, who's at least a high-level player, and we know that, and maybe you kind of try and get more out of him and get him to fit a little bit more. And that's the direction that I would go. If you can't get Trae Young, DeJounte Murray, sure, one of those two, but if you can't get those two, I'm not making a deal with the Atlanta Hawks. Same thing with the Cleveland Cavaliers. If you're not getting me both Garland and Allen for Ingram, then I'm not going to do that sort of deal, or just Donovan Mitchell. Those are the type of levels, players that I would trade Brandon Ingram for, and that's pretty much it. So if you don't get that value, I'm not making a Brandon Ingram trade just to make a Brandon Ingram trade. Or do you disagree? Do you think he's just got to be off the team by the start of next year? Let me know what you think in the comments down below. I'm genuinely curious what y'all think and feel the Pelicans really, truly need to do about him. So coming up next, it's not the TV deal, but a radio deal got done, and that's bigger than you think, way bigger than you think. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is America's #1 fantasy sports app with more than 5 million members. It's the most fun and exciting way to get in on the action while watching your favorite sports and players. You pick more or less on 2 or more players' stats for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. With PrizePicks, you can turn $10 into $1,000 in a single game watching your favorite sports this summer. You can make a PrizePicks lineup in as little as 60 seconds, and you just need to pick more or less on 2 to 6 players' stat projections, and then you're locked in. So there's always action on PrizePicks, and this is the perfect time to try something new as basketball is winding down. Make sure you try out esports this month because every Wednesday and Saturday in June, if your lineup doesn't win, you'll get your entry fee back. So choose from Counter-Strike 2, Call of Duty, League of Legends, and more. They got everything over at PrizePicks right now. So download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. You can download the PrizePicks app today. Use promo code LOCKEDONNBA. You'll get a first deposit match up to $100. PrizePicks, pick more, pick less. It's that easy. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans. I just got a text from Locked On Saints here, so I got a little distracted. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We are here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube for your second listen. The Locked On Saints podcast, Ross Jackson breaking down everything black and gold that you could want. OTAs going on, final week of that, giving you the insight you're not going to get anywhere else. So subscribe to Locked On Saints. Make them your second listen today. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So we're going to switch gears from trades. I just don't see a deal getting done with Sacramento if you cannot get De'Aaron Fox. And truthfully, I don't see them trading him. If David Griffin pulls that off, we'll throw him a parade in the city. Because that means the Pelicans are probably going to win a title. I think if you put Fox on this team with Zion Williamson, that would be a great, any kind of like real good guard like that, I think is what you want here. So we're going to switch gears though, because no matter what, this is going to be a key season for the Pelicans next year. You want to be able to listen to them, watch them. We don't have anything, and we'll talk about it in a sec on the TV side of things right now. But the Pelicans and Saints announced a multi-year radio agreement with WWL Radio. I'll be honest, this is bigger than you think. You probably don't listen to the games on the radio. I don't know how widespread it is, but there are a lot of people that do. And they've been on weird stations before. Maybe not the most listened to. Maybe, a talk radio station that plays Pelicans games is a little bit odd. It feels like they should be on a sports station. WWL Radio is absolutely that. WWL AM FM is just a force. It's a force. They have been doing this for such a long time, and their signal is so strong. One of the things, it's in the press release here, but I even knew this, is it reaches to 38 states. The Pelicans are going to be on that station with that tower that is so strong it reaches 38 states. Yes, people, wherever it goes, might not be looking for Pelicans games, but the fact that it just reaches that far, I mean, someone somewhere passively is just going to kind of absorb some stuff when it comes to the Pels. Now, they're also one of the radio stations that early on really did focus on the Pelicans too. I've been making appearances on there for years. I'm friends with, Bobby Hebert, Mike Detillier, and all of them over at that station, Steve Geller. And it's been wonderful to go on there. I've been in the studio hosting shows, known hosts from the past. I'll know everyone going forward, regularly appearing on there because they do make an effort to talk basketball in a way that a lot of other places don't at times. Now that they're going to have the Pelicans games on there, that's going to mean they're going to talk about it even more. So on this powerful station that gets a ton of listeners, that has a ton of sports talk, they're going to talk even more Pelicans and more basketball. This is exposure to not just the region, but a wider audience. You pick up one or two people, that's more than you had before. So that coverage extending to 38 states, but really Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Florida Panhandle. They also have the FM station as well, right? 870 AM is that one that we all think about, but they're also going to have it on the FM station as well. This is pretty great for the Pelicans. Again, expanding that reach, we know that is absolutely what they want to do. So AM at 870 or FM at 105.3, you're going to get a much bigger audience than you would have otherwise. And also, Todd Graffanini is absolutely awesome on the call. You got Aaron Summers in there, John DeShazer as well. All of that is great. The radio team is pretty awesome, and now they're going to get to go to a bigger audience. This is only good for exposure when it comes to the Pelicans. We'll still wait to see what's going to go on with the TV deal. Bally Sports kind of going through their bankruptcy and everything like that has kind of changed some of that. There's complications trying to put them on Fox 8 Gray because of that Fox programming. That's something that I've been telling you for like 2 years now, that it makes sense that they would go on there. Benson's don't own that station. or have an ownership stake in it anymore, and they haven't for years. But because they have that, I think it's like NBC programming, there's issue, or not NBC, Fox programming, that's an issue. And I don't know if that's something that's easily resolved. If you look at the other markets that do kind of have deals to put them on Fox stations, gray stations, they're owned slightly differently, I believe, than this one is. This kind of my working knowledge of it all. It might be on Bally Sports next year, but I definitely know that and can tell you this, that the Pelicans are behind the scenes, like working to figure out the best solution to make these games available. Whether that kind of comes in a timely manner that we're all hoping for, I'm not entirely sure. We hope it would be, but it remains to be seen a little bit. But they're definitely kind of working on that and trying their best to figure all of that out. But this is a good first step towards making things available. You should give it a try one time. Watching the broadcast, muting that and putting on the radio call to match up with it. It's pretty fun. And if you're driving, you can't watch a game, you're going to be able to easily listen to the Pelicans wherever you are. That comes up from time to time. So this is only a good thing. More broad appeal for the team, kind of blasting them out there as I hit the mic with my hand. I'm happy to hear this. Glad for everyone who's going to get kind of the more exposure they want. Let me know what you think of the WWL deal down below in the comments. Let me know what you think you want them to do for a TV deal as well. So tomorrow on Locked On Pelicans, the ideal offseason, the draft, the trade, the free agents. I'm going to break it all down, including salary cap numbers for you in tomorrow's episode of Locked On Pelicans. You're not going to want to miss this one. Next week, ton of draft. Let me know if there's players you want to hear me talk about on the show. We're going to be covering it all here at Locked On Pelicans, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I appreciate y'all so much for listening, and I'll see y'all tomorrow.